This video is going to go over our fairy tales essay, which is riding on the heels of our lesson about the recognition that within fairy tales, there's cultural values and lessons imbued within them. And surprise, surprise, that's exactly what we're going to do for this paper. You're going to choose a fairy tale from a particular culture. It could be from your own culture too, if you like. And you're going to look at just what these values are in the story. Like, what's the message, the takeaway message, and how this aligns with the values of the culture. So, you're going to have to do a little investigation to learn more about the culture that it comes from and what you might, what that those fairy tale values might reflect about the culture themselves, and also like what it teaches children, right? So here's our central questions. What are the primary values and lessons presented in the fairy tale, and how are they articulated? How do these values and messages reflect the culture and time period from which the tale originates? So, was there something that was happening historically that made it necessary to have this fairy tale really bring to the forefront a particular value or lesson, right? What implications might these lessons have for children? Why are they significant within that culture? So it's going to have you investigate a little bit about the culture and you're going to look at a fairy tale. So that's a neat thing. Just like, for example, like we're going to see next week, there's different versions of fairy tales. Like we're going to look at Little Red Riding Hood next week. And there's different versions of that. So you can choose a particular version of any fairy tale. Um, like these are the guiding questions. So again, recognizing we talked about explicit values and implicit, right? So like the explicit, what's the takeaway message, the theme, and the implicit, like what happens to the characters that embody like the values that are being celebrated? What happens to the characters that embody the values that are being maligned, right? In what ways do the characters and plot illustrate the values of the culture? How do cultural elements like settings, customs, or language enhance the story's message? So, what's the setting? Where does it take place? How does that enhance the story? And even connections to real life, right? Or contemporary issues or personal experiences can be connected to these lessons. And how might they influence the moral development of young readers? So, this is a neat thing. Go ahead, choose a fairy tale that you enjoy. Here's our info. And I want to just make sure to pay attention to our dates, right, for this assignment. I want to go over our worksheet. And this is going to help you. This is the first thing that's going to be due, right? So here you're just going to write what's your fairy tale, who wrote it, and what culture is it from, right? And then what culture does it originate from? What culture values are reflected in the fairy tale? What do you learn about this culture through the fairy tale, right? Some of the values of the culture. Who are the key characters in your fairy tale? How their actions are all illustrate the cultural values or fears. We talked about that. Um, and, they imbue within the fairy tales values and fears, right, of a culture. So, what specific cultural elements are present? How do these elements enhance the story's message, right? Oh, how do you, again, personal connection. So, how do you relate to these values or fears? And then contemporary connections to those, right? Here's our central questions. What are the primary values and lessons presented in the fairy tale? And how are they articulated? So, what's the takeaway lesson? What do we learn? And how are they presented? And how do those align with the values of the culture that fairy tale comes from, right? Or maybe a fear. What implications does that have for children, and why is it significant within that culture? So here's your thesis, your answer of the question. Here's a space for your intro, how you introduce that, background info, have your thesis. For the body paragraphs, these are suggestions. Let's say you start off with what's the larger takeaway of the fairy tale? Here's the topic of your paragraph. What supporting evidence, of course, is what you're going to use from the text to support you. Analysis is how. So you put it together. Here's another one. Let's say second body paragraph was cultural context and values. So what's the values of the lesson of the culture and how that aligns with the lessons of the fairy tale? It's another one like what might it teach children and its real life connections, right? So this is just some ideas for one some particular topics you can make your body paragraphs about, but that's up to you. And then, of course, the conclusion where you reaffirm the project, the thesis, and the implication. So, why it's an important lesson and fairy tale, like what we can learn from it. And that is our assignment. First thing we got is choose your fairy tale. Be looking at some. It's a fun opportunity to do a little exploration of fairy tales around the world. Enjoy.